Why can't we be friends? Maybe you remember the song by War containing that line. Now let's apply it to religion and hip hop. Our location today is Swisher House. Now, Swisher House has brought you the music that you love. Founded in the 1990s by Michael 5000 Watts and OG Ron C., later joined by G-Dash, it has done phenomenal work. In addition to producing music that you can't stop listening to, Swisher House has also partnered on a variety of community-based healthcare initiatives. Now, we're here today because we're going to move our conversation from the difficulties churches have had with certain forms of musical expression, hip-hop, to the ways in which hip-hop artists have challenged religious institutions and religious doctrines. Now, in our last session together, I gave you a bit of information concerning the ways in which churches raise questions about involvement in the world. I want to give you one more example from the other tradition that we're encountering during this course before we move on to culture's response to religion. The Nation of Islam has always had a strict moral and ethical code, a code of conduct that involved a certain perception of how you move through the world, limits on what you could do and what you could not do. No smoking, no drinking, no cursing, no dancing, a variety of no's. This often creates conflict with hip-hop artists who want to celebrate life's simple pleasures. Now, certain artists may celebrate getting together with friends and having a little gin and juice. Now, put that over against what the Nation of Islam says about the use of alcoholic beverages, and you see that there is a conflict. So religious institutions have been critical of cultural production, but you should not think this was a one-way street. There are so many examples within popular culture of folks outside of the church raising questions concerning its conduct. Let me just give you a couple of examples. One, the internationally known writer Richard Wright, in more than one text, argues that black churches do very little to safeguard the well-being of folks who are in need. In his autobiography, Black Boy, he says something along these lines, that if he had encountered the church before he encountered anything to do with the world, the harshness, the roughness of the world, he would have been sold. But once he encountered the world and what it meant to live in a context that was troubled, what the church offered in its sermons and its songs did him very little good. Another example, Nulla Larson, in her novel Quicksand, develops a character who raises questions concerning the utility of religion, its ability to help people make it through the day in a way that sustained them and gave them full integrity. Helga Crane, that character, eventually argues that God cannot provide her with assistance simply because there is no God. She's left to her own devices to make it through the world as best she can. So literary figures like these two presented a very different take on religious life than what folks got sitting in church pews. They raised questions about the moral and ethical outlook of religious institutions and did that in a way that raised serious questions concerning the claims of religious institutions. In addition to literary critiques of religion, there has been tremendous attention given to the morals and ethics of religious institutions within the context of music. I'm going to highlight the blues. Now, when I say blues, don't think in terms of the mid-20th century and race records. Think about the earlier formations. In the same way that we cannot accurately date the beginning of the spirituals, we cannot accurately date the beginning of the blues. What we do know is these two musical forms had very different opinions on religious claims, Christian claims, whereas the spirituals embraced and assumed the correctness of Christian teachings. The blues raised questions about the ability of these teachings to make a felt difference in the world. And this critique of religion within the blues will continue. One of the sore spots for the blues involved the church's inability to understand the body in ways that weren't negative. Within the context of churches, whether they were black churches or white churches, it didn't matter much. Within the context of these Christian churches, the human body was suspect. Suspect because it was prone to sin. had desires and wants that ran contrary to the will of God. And so the body had to be contained, disciplined. Well, the blues understood the body as a wonderful thing, and the pleasure that the body received and gave was also a wonderful thing. So whereas within churches, sexual activity, for example, wasn't talked about, certainly not openly, within the blues, sexual activity was celebrated. So in some of these early blues tunes, you might hear a reference to jelly rolling, and you shouldn't think sugary sweets. Jelly rolling was a way to discuss sexual activity, sexual intercourse. You'll see the conflict here. The blues all about this world, enjoying life within the context of human history. Churches holding the body and what it wants, suspect, thinking about a life beyond this body, whereas the blues think of life only through this body. The relationship between religion and culture is long, it's rich, it's complex, but it hasn't always been friendly. Now, I've given you two examples, one drawn from literature, the other drawn from music, the blues. Now, you may want a bit more on this conflict, and you know how to find it at this point. Now, what we need to do next is tie this conversation into the other focus of the course, hip-hop. What are the ways in which hip-hop artists have challenged Christian and Islamic sensibilities?